What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 373. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources. And can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, interesting. Joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, I am in California, not too far from where you grew up. I'm in Petaluma visiting Woody for the GP.
That's reasonably far from Oakland, actually.
It is kind of far, isn't it? I just think Bay Area because I'm not from here, but he's pretty far away.
Yeah, I've been to Petaluma like twice or something in my entire life.
He said that there's like sometimes he comes home and there's actual deer in the parking lot just hanging out. So we're kind of far out here. Not quite the same like in Oakland. You never had a deer come to your house in Oakland, did you?
I did not. No.
But yeah, I'm down here for the GP. I'm actually going to be playing in it, so I'm pretty excited about that. That should be fun. We've got Aether Revolt first impressions on the docket here today for the podcast. And that means a few crack-a-packs and just an initial take. You know, Luis and I have had a chance to get our hands on some of the cards. I've done some drafts. I've done some sealeds. And just give you that first look to get an idea of sort of how the format's going to shape up. Before we get into all that, of course, I want to remind you about our sponsor, ChannelFireball.com. They are the place to go on the internet for all of your Magic-related needs, whether it's buying cards, selling cards, getting supplies. If you need free content, and who doesn't need free content? You can find it on ChannelFireball.com from some of the best players in the world, all with the goal of helping you improve at Magic, which coincidentally is exactly what our goal is on this podcast as well. You know, we like to put out the show so that you can come here once a week and hang out with Luis and I, as well as improve your game at Magic. And that's what they do at CFB on the content side of things. And I highly recommend it if you're looking to get better. I mean, it's videos, watching some of the best players draft. It is a really good way to watch. In fact, there's even Aether Revolt videos up right now as well. And if you want to see me get completely annihilated in one of my rounds, you can watch my first Aether Revolt video as well. Somebody even tweeted at me. They're like, dude, I hope it gets better. That's what they said. I was like, well, I guess I do too. Also, the show, of course, is brought to you by you via the Patreon. You can support the show directly on patreon.com/limited resources. All the information is there. It's very easy to get set up, and we do appreciate it. One of the things that you get by being a patron is you get to submit questions for the question of the week. This one comes from Matthew. He says, he's going to play in GP Toronto. It's going to be his first ever GP. And the goal he set for himself is to make day 2. Now, his question, he's primarily an online Magic player, is about the fundamentals of competitive paper draft. What are the basic rules and procedures for taking and passing cards? He says when he watches paper events on Twitch, he sees people counting them out and laying them down before they pass them, but not everybody does it in the same way. Are there timing cues for when you're supposed to make your pick or when you can look at the next pack? He says he knows that you can only take stock of your draft as it's going in between packs, but do you have any memory tips to make sure on how to track them? Basically, he wants us to run through our process for that. Now, Luis, I have done, they call them timed drafts at GPs before, but you've done way more of them than I have. So I think we should get your take on it. What is your process for doing those time drafts?
It's not that different from a normal draft. The basic rule is you'll open your pack. At a GP, they're going to have these the packs already opened by the judges and labeled. So you're not actually opening a booster pack, but you're going to flip the bottom card because the bottom card faces the other direction. So there's only card backs facing outwards. Mm-hmm. And don't worry if you mess that part up. It's fine.
Yeah, they mess it up on camera all the time.
You'll have 50 seconds or whatever it is for your first pick. You have enough time for the picks, unless you're reading every card, which you at this point shouldn't be. You're putting all your cards in a face down pile. You're laying out your cards. You don't have to lay them out in a specific way, just as long as the next person can count them. So, layers of 4 cards or 5 cards or whatever. It doesn't matter. And then when they say pass, everyone will pick their card. You'll lay out the pack and then you'll pick up your next, and they'll tell you when to pick up your next pass. Basically, the judge will tell you everything you need to know as you're doing it. So you don't actually have to know anything before you sit down. As far as remembering what you drafted, you get to look in between packs, and I tend to sort cards by cost. I have all my creatures by cost and all my spells by cost if you've watched me stream. or draft on Channel Fireball, you'll see that that's kind of how I have my creatures in a curve and then my spells in a curve separately. And that's how I tend to remember things, but you can do it however you want. And that's basically it.
Okay. It is pretty straightforward.
The one big difference between drafting like on Magic Online and this is that you just don't get to see your picks. What you can do if you want to practice for that is you can draft on Magic Online without looking at your picks. You can minimize the window or cover it or whatever it is you want. So you can and just look in between packs. So you can have try to practice for that. But honestly, I would worry less about the mechanics of this and more about just knowing the draft format, because first of all, you're like given pretty clear instructions, and then second of all, if you mess something up, you don't get a game lost. They just tell you like, hey, make sure to pass the pack, or make sure to lay out the pack neatly or whatever.
Yeah. Pretty straightforward. And like you said, the judges really do a good job with making sure that you have all the information that you need at every juncture too. It's not like they get you going and then they walk away. They will actually say draft. And that is when you take your pack and then you pass, and they'll tell you how many cards you should be passing to your left. And if any time you see something that looks amiss, you just raise your hand and let the judges know, and they'll take care of it. So good luck at your GP when that rolls around, Matthew, and thank you for the question. Okay, so we've got a few crack-a-packs to do here, Luis, because with the new set, of course, this is one of the ways that we can dive in and kind of get the discussion going, is to do a few crack-a-packs. So I'm going to just go for one right here. First Aether Revolt crack-a-pack, that is. All right, our first card is Conviction. This is the one in a white in aura that gives your creature +1/+3, and you can pay a white to return it to your hand. Interesting card. I found it already. It does have its home in the format. It can be a revolt enabler in some decks, and also it creates big blockers and sometimes creatures that can get it through for damage that normally couldn't. And I've also found it just very good against red. Like if your opponent is playing green-red or something like that, where their primary removal source is going to be burn spells, if you can get Conviction on a creature, it makes your creature a significant amount better and also makes it virtually impossible to burn out.
I am not going to first pick a Conviction, but I do think the card is a little better than I thought at first read.
Yeah, I agree. Here's a good one too. Aether Chaser, the one in a red 2/1 first strike, and it gets 2 energy, and when it attacks, you can make a servo by paying the 2 energy.
One of the better red commons. I like Aether Chaser. I wouldn't be too unhappy to take it early. It's just a solid attacker, solid blocker. It gets you a servo. It just does a lot of different things and does them all pretty well. 2 mana, 2/1 first strike's a card I'd always play. So
agreed.
This has significant upside on that.
Yeah, it also works well with combat tricks. Yeah, it's just a good card. This next one has not impressed me. It's Shipwreck Moray. This is the 3 and a blue 0/5 fish. And you get 4 energy when it enters the battlefield. You can pay an energy to give it +2/-2 until end of turn.
It seems like a playable card. It's not one I'm excited about.
Yeah, agreed. Night Market Aeronaut is the 4 mana, the 3 and a black 2/2 with flying. With Revolt, it gets a +1/+1 counter. I have yet to be able to make this one look good, and I have not seen people play it against me, and I have played a fair bit of the format. I'm starting to think Night Market Aeronaut is not a great card.
It isn't, because you have to jump through a hoop to make it playable, because 4 mana 2/2 flyer is really not playable, and it's not worth jumping through that hoop, because 4 mana 3/3 flyer, I mean, that's great, but it's not worth either having to sacrifice a card or spend more mana. That's the key, is that if your Revolt enabler costs 1 or 2 mana to use, then all of a sudden your efficiency is just out the window, and 5 mana 3/3 flyer is not a card I'm super excited about. So
no, not these days. What do you think about 3 mana 2/2 with Reach?
And Revolt draw card.
Yes, and Revolt draw card. So, I think one of the ways that it was helpful for us on the set review, and I think going forward, is to apply that critique that you just did to the Night Market Aeronaut, which is to say, well, what's the floor here? And a 2/2 flyer for 4, like you said, not playable. What about a 3 mana 2/2 Reach?
Not playable.
Agreed. And then, you're going to try to get Revolt going and draw a card, which of course makes it, again, similar to the Aeronaut, something that you're like, oh, I'd like to have that card. Like, 3 mana 2/2 Reach draw card is like very good. Same thing with 3/3 flying for 4 is very good. But man, I have found it very difficult to get Silkweaver Elite to actually trigger, because I just don't want to hold it in my hand, till the late part of the game where it's a little easier to get Revolt going.
Yeah, I've not been impressed by this card.
Me neither. In fact, the opposite. Next is Destructive Tampering. This card has impressed me a bit. It's a 2 and a red sorcery. And you can choose one, destroy an artifact or make it so all non-flying creatures cannot block this turn.
This is the kind of split card I like. Two kind of narrow effects that are useful in pretty different situations. Kind of adds up to a card which has a fairly wide range and also two powerful effects. So
yeah,
I mean, Magmatic Chasm, the second effect is when you want that, it's just going to win you the game. Like that effect wins you the game a lot of the time when it's good, but it's not always good. On the other hand, Shatter, destroy an artifact is a card that is pretty easy to find an answer or a situation where it's okay in. But having this Shatter / Magmatic Chasm split card, it's a really intriguing combination of two very wildly disparate abilities, which I think add up well. I actually like how this overlaps.
I do too. I've been playing one in the main deck. Next is Filigree Crawler, the 4-mana 2/2 artifact creature, and when it dies, you get a Thopter. I have not been impressed by Filigree Crawler, even though I see some of the synergies. There's some stuff going on with it, but the power level just doesn't seem to be there.
It doesn't seem like it's there because you have to wait too long to get the Thopter, and the Thopter is what you really want. 4 mana for a 2/2 plus a 1/1 would be great. Like if it just made a Thopter and you played it, but it's just too many things can go wrong. So I'm not a fan of Filigree Crawler.
Yeah. We've got an implement here. This was the black one, Implement of Malice. So 2 mana artifact, and you can pay black and sack it to have target player discard a card at sorcery speed. And then whenever the implement goes to the graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card.
These are the kind of cards that you don't play unless you have a reason to. But in the decks with Improvise or Revolt, they do justify themselves.
They do.
If you're blue-black and have 2 Bastion Inventors, all of a sudden the Implement of Malice looks pretty good. So I would not be taking this card early, clearly, but it is a card that you will play.
Agreed. Yeah, the implements have all impressed. I mean, I've even been playing the red one, which I thought looked like the worst one. But, there is something to be said for 1 mana to get that card back, even if it is one of the most minor effects you could see. Interesting also to note the green one, Implement of Ferocity, also 1 mana, but it needs a target. It's weird. It actually might be a little worse, even though I generally much rather have a +1/+1 counter on a creature than do a damage. But there are times when you really just want to sack that thing. And if you don't have a creature at all, like if there isn't a creature, you just can't. And if you don't have a creature, then you have to put it on your opponent's creature, which is kind of annoying. But like I said, the +1/+1 counter definitely a real effect. But unfortunately, we don't have one of those here. The next card is Aegis Automaton. This is the 2 mana 0/3 with an activated ability of 4 and a white, return another target creature you control to its owner's hand.
I still like the idea of this card, but even I'm not deranged enough to say that you should take it early.
Yeah, agreed. All right, this brings us to the uncommons, where we've actually got 4 uncommons here, Luis. The first one is a card that I've definitely liked, and I thought I would. It's Rogue Refiner, the 1 blue-green 3/2, and when it enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy and you draw a card.
Yeah, even though it's a multicolor card, I still think the card's strong enough to be worth first picking.
Yeah, I do too. It's really impressed me. Here's another card. I wonder if you've had a chance to play with or against it. Yeah, this is one I was kind of down on. In the set review, it's Gremlin Infestation, the 4 mana, 3 and a red aura that enchants an artifact. At the beginning of your end step, it does 2 damage to the artifact's controller, and if the artifact is put into a graveyard, you get a 2/2 Gremlin.
It's not a card that I've been that impressed with. I like the idea of the card, but finding a target for it, it's just the risk of not having a target for it makes it just not a card I'm actually that interested in main deck, and even though I thought I would like it a little bit more.
I think I gave it a sideboard grade in the end. Remember, I was all messed up on that card. Next is Siege Modification, the 1 red aura that enchants a creature or vehicle. The creature gets +3/+0 in first strike, and if it was a vehicle, it becomes a creature in addition to its other types.
Siege Modification is a powerful card, and one I think is actually worth playing in an aggressive deck. It's an aura, which obviously has its own intrinsic risks of getting 2 for 1, but I think it is good enough that if you have evasion or trampling creatures, then you end up not hating it. It also can go on vehicles. I mean, that's clearly part of the idea of the card, but I don't think you need to be too hung up on that.
Yeah. I have yet to play with it. I have played against it, and I have yet to lose to it, though it did put a real big punch together the turn it came down, but I was able to get rid of my opponent's creatures a few times that I've played against it, and they had a hard time coming back. Our last uncommon, which by the way is our 4th one, like I mentioned, because it's foil, is Skyship Plunderer. This is the 1 and a blue 2/1 flying human pirate. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player for each kind of counter on target permanent or player, give that permanent or player an additional counter of that kind.
I think I would take this over Rogue Refiner Pick 1, Pack 1.
Card's good.
Yeah, it's monocolor. It's slightly worse. If I was blue-green, I'd rather have the Refiner, I think. But it's close because a 2-mana 2/1 flying is good, and having a real upside on it is great. Like if you play this on turn 2 and then follow it up with a creature that has a +1/+1 counter or an energy creature on turn 3, all of a sudden you're just getting value out of your 2-mana 2/1 flyer. Sounds awesome.
Yeah, that is good. I've got good news and bad news about our last card, Luis. The good news is it's a mythic rare.
Okay.
The bad news is it's Paradox Engine.
That is straight unplayable. One of the 6 or 7 cards in the set I think I would never put in my deck.
Yeah.
So
5-mana
whenever
legend.
whenever you play a spell, untap all non-land permanents you control.
That's correct. Yeah. So sorry, Paradox Engine. So you like Skyship Plunderer over the Rogue Refiner for the pick here, huh?
I do. I would take those, and then Aether Chaser is like the third pick behind those two, but I would take the Skyship Plunderer to start with.
Yeah, I would actually as well. I've been impressed by it. And even though I am not afraid to be blue-green in the format, I would much prefer to just stay one color to start things off. And I think the Skyship Plunderer is a good start. All right, let's open another Aether Revolt pack here. Let's see what we've got. All right, we've got Leave in the Dust as our first card. That's the 3 and a blue. Instant return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, draw a card.
I'm a fan of this card. It's not super efficient, but it replaces itself, and you can bounce something that costs 4 or 5 mana often enough. Plus, it has good interactions against auras. I would be surprised if I would be happy first picking it. I don't think I will be, but it is a card I want to put in my deck.
Yeah, I that's my exact assessment on it. Conviction, no.
Still,
Shock.
I'm going to first pick a Shock. It's the best red common and one of the better commons overall.
I have a question for you on that. Because that brings up an interesting question. You said it's the best red common, but what about Chandra's Revolution? How close do you think those are together?
I will say that this is without having played the format much. I've done a couple drafts on Magic Online, but this Shock just costing 1 mana is just such a very big difference that it's possible it shakes out that Chandra's Revolution ends up being a card you want more, but it's just hard time imagining a world where you'd want a 4-mana card over a 1-mana card with comparable effects. So I'm starting out by taking Shock. It might be that it doesn't line up well against the cards you care about and you want Chandra's Revolution, but I mean, just imagine a deck that has 2 Shocks and then a normal curve versus a deck that has 2 4-drops and a normal curve. Just the Shocks sound better. You can just play a 2-drop and a Shock on turn 3.
True. Yeah. I actually, interestingly, for a video I did for CFB, I had that choice. I was already in red and I had the choice between Shock and Chandra's Revolution. And I really tanked. I went pretty deep on the clock trying to figure out which one I actually wanted. And based on my experience, I actually took the Chandra's Revolution. At that juncture, that also could have been swayed by the other removal spells I had or something. So it's not a perfectly clean, heads up fight there between the two cards. But I do think that the Chandra's Revolution being able to kill such a wider range of creatures, even if it can't go to the head, does bump it up a little bit higher as you play against a green deck and Shock is pretty mediocre against a lot of their cards. That said, I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up being the opposite, that I would actually rather just have Shock over it. But I am curious. That's one of the little fights we'll keep our eye on as we move through the format. Aether Herder is next. Yawn. 3 and a green for a 3/3 Elf Artificer Druid. You get 2 energy when it enters the battlefield, and when it attacks, you can pay 2 energy to make a servo. Card's fine.
Yeah, it's a solid playable.
It is. I've been playing him. Yeah, I've been playing him, but it's just boring. It's whatever. This is a card I still don't really like, but it's starting to creep on my radar because, it's Renegade's Getaway. The 2 and a black instant, target permanent gains indestructible until end of turn, and you get a servo. I really don't like the card that much. I don't think it's a particularly powerful card. It's pretty situational. It's pretty expensive. But I have got by it. I've tried to kill stuff and had them save it and been like, well, that is kind of game. That one big juncture where you use your big removal spell on their big bomb and they have this card and you're like, well, that's it.
Well, part of the problem there is that if you're only looking at it from that side, you don't see when it's in the opponent's hand not doing anything.
Oh, yeah.
Because when this card gets cast, it is good. 3 mana to counter a card or to win a combat and then get a servo is good, but it's just a 3 mana combat trick that doesn't make your creature bigger. So I think that it's a mediocre playable at best.
I think the term I'm looking for is I'm off it.
Right.
Silkweaver Elite is next. That's the spider or the reach guy we talked about earlier.
Reach.
Yep, still bad. Or still not good enough. Close. This next one's along the same vein, actually. But again, the whole floor ceiling thing is a little changed. This is Countless Gears Renegade. 1 and a white for a 2/2, and it's got Revolt. When it enters the battlefield, you get a servo.
I think this card is playable because
Me too.
1 and a white for a 2/2 is already a pretty decent, baseline, but it's not a card I'm that excited about. Like, basically, this is the kind of card that you'll put in your deck, but you won't go out of your way to enable Revolt, and then sometimes in the mid-game you get Revolt.
Exactly. That's exactly where I stand on it. But again, the floor is good enough here for me to play that. I'm still taking Shock over it. Another Implement of Malice. We're not taking that over Shock. What do you think about Reservoir Walker? 5 mana, 3/3 artifact creature. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life and get 3 energy.
Not a fan. I don't think that it does enough. I think in a defensive energy deck, there's some merit to it, but it's not a card I'm going to go out and acquire, very actively.
Yeah, I've played a few of them, and they performed better than I thought they would. But as far as picking them goes, you can just get them whenever you want. I mean, the 5-drop slot's already competitive, and these are dime a dozen. Okay, uncommons. First one, Deadeye Harpooner.
This has a lot of moving pieces. This is 2 and a white for a 2/2 and has Revolt, destroy a tapped creature an opponent controls. So you basically have to set it up where, first of all, Revolt's on and they have a tapped creature, which is...
When you cast it, because it's Revolt when this enters the battlefield. It does that, yeah.
So it's a lot of hoops to jump through. The reward is good, but I'm not convinced that this card is going to... I think it's going to be on, like, I don't know, I want to say like 15% of the time or something like that. Like not a high. It's either going to be on that low of a number or you're just not going to cast it. So which is kind of the same thing. So it's not a card that I'm very impressed with.
Yeah, it's interesting how they were able to play around with this ceiling floor stuff, because once again we have one where the floor is really not high enough here. The 2/2 for 3 is just not going to cut it. But the ceiling is pretty high. I mean, if you get to kill a key creature with it, that can be a pretty big deal. I've seen it do both. Overall, I'm down on it. I agree. I think it's down in the 20% range on how often you actually get to harpoon something, and that makes it a pretty big liability. So if you build a Revolt deck, hey, then more power to you, but otherwise I'm not a huge fan. Oh God.
What do you got?
Untethered Express.
This is just one of the best cards in the set, I think. It's 4 mana for a 4/4 vehicle with a crew 1, and when it attacks, it gets a ++1 counter, and it has trample.
Stupid. I've played against it. I've played with it. It's just dumb.
Yeah, it
lives up.
Yeah, it's basically an uncommon Renegade Freighter with all that entails. It's a slightly more powerful Renegade Freighter.
Yep.
And Renegade Freighter was very good. So
yeah, I like it better than Shock myself.
Also, it's colorless. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was way better than Shock. Mm-hmm. So it's a pretty high bar. So we might be able to beat it, but it's gonna be difficult.
It is. How about the old Reverse Engineer? 3 blue sorcery, draw 3 cards, improvise.
As much as I want to draw 3 cards, Untethered Express is much better.
You'd rather do 5 damage.
Then 6 damage, then 7 damage.
And then the game's over. Well, we've got another foil. It's beautiful, but it's a forest. Christine Choi, great work on the art there, but unfortunately that's not going to be our pick. That leaves us with our rare, which is Carrie Zev's Expertise, which is not going to steal the throne from the Untethered Express. It's 1 red sorcery. Gain control of a creature or vehicle until end of turn. Untap it. It gains haste, and you can cast a card with converted mana cost 2 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost.
Yeah, I'm not big on threatens unless you have sacrifice outlets. So most decks are just not going to play this, even red decks. Like, most red decks do not want this. You have to be really aggressive or have ways to sacrifice. Getting to play a 2-drop for free is just not good text on this. No. Because by the time you cast this, you probably don't have one. So... I have Untethered Express by a mile, then probably Shock, then Reverse Engineer, though I could be talked into Reverse Engineer over Shock, I suppose. Yeah,
I think we'll have to wait and see at what point in the format we are before we make that call. Okay, let's move on to our main topic here. We'll be doing plenty of crack-a-packs for Aether Revolt as we work our way through the format here. Let's get the initial impressions going. So we've got, a decent amount. At this point, I've actually done quite a bit. I think I've done 6 drafts and 5 sealed pools, which is, that's more than I normally would have by now. And I'm pretty busy when it comes to getting ready for doing commentary in the booth. But I've got a chance to do more sealed than I normally would have. And then we're doing the show a little bit later in the week this time, and that let us do a few drafts on Magic Online as well. So we've actually got a decent little start here. What has been standing out for you about Aether Revolt Limited so far?
Well, it's kind of interesting because how fast the format was something that we argued about a lot. Though I do ultimately think Triple Kaladesh was fairly fast. I think Aether Revolt made the format slower. It feels like there are fewer Renegade Freighters and Sky Skiffs and Thriving Rhinos. These are all like kind of overstatted creatures. And there's more synergy because both Improvise and Revolt are synergy mechanics, and that, whereas opposed to something like Fabricate. So it seems like the format is reasonably slower. I don't know how much slower. I'm not saying it's like, you're only drafting 7 drops, but it's not, you're not going to die on turn 6 as often.
Yeah, for sure. One of the interesting things I've seen, just as something to note, is that people have been playing 16 land decks way more often than a normal format, though it isn't for the reasons that you might think, which is, when you hear 16 land deck, you think, wow, like it's curving out at 4. It's this really aggressive, like lean deck. But I think what I've been seeing more is that people are playing 16 land decks because they're playing Renegade maps and because they're playing effectively replacement lands or a bunch of cheap cantrips, or I should say, or a bunch of cheap cantrips. So they feel like they can get away with 1 less land.
I think Renegade map just counts as a land. 15 land and 2 Renegade maps. It's a colorless mana fixer that costs 1 mana. So
do you think so? Do you think it counts as a land?
You can't play 10 lands and 7 Renegade maps.
Yeah.
But the difference between 15 land and 2 maps and 17 land is, I think, meaningless in the sense that a 1 land plus a map hand is a 2 land hand.
Yes.
A hand of just a map is effectively the same as a 1-lander because you're just going to mulligan it anyway. You're not keeping 1-landers.
True.
So
what about on turn 5 or something?
Yeah, it hurts your high. It hurts. It's basically like having a come into play tapped land.
Yeah.
But like it's like having an Evolving Wilds. I mean, you don't think Evolving Wilds doesn't count as a land, even though on turn 5 it's tapped also.
Totally.
So I think, it's slightly worse because you could like draw the map on turn 5, miss your land drop, and then next turn crack it, but you also drew a land, so then you're like, you don't have, if it was an Evolving Wilds, clearly you have 7 land in play, but
yeah,
still or 6 land in play rather, but still I think it counts as a land. So 16 land plus a map is effectively 17.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's what most people are doing. What about energy? Because energy was one of the few mechanics that actually carried over from Kaladesh.
It did carry over. It seems less prevalent because it just feels like there's a lot more going on. Energy was like the big synergy push in Kaladesh, but now with Revolt and Improvise, there's just decks that are built to maximize those instead. And then like the Thriving cycle of creatures, it got replaced by like Aether Chasers cycle. I don't know if they have I guess the Aether is the keyword there, right? That's the one that they all have. The pay 2 energy, make a 1/1.
Yeah, Aether Herder. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But the Thriving cycle, I think, generally is better and more impactful. So you're more likely to want to build towards it, or you were more likely to want to build towards it. But energy's still there.
It's as good as counters, right?
Yeah, energy's still there, but it's not quite to the same degree.
Yeah, it is interesting how you can. I think we still face a similar situation that we did in Kaladesh, where the question becomes not as much where do I get my energy from, as you can often find sources incidentally that will just generate you some energy, but where do I spend it? And we got a few new payoffs. We did. It's not like we got 0, but I think that balance is still very much intact when it comes to sorting out, when you're trying to figure out what my deck's doing. If you're like, I'm an energy deck, then you should really be asking yourself, well, what are you spending it on? What's your payoff? Because there's 2 fewer packs rolling around of Whirler Virtuosos to hook you up, and that was kind of, one of the primary places to dump your energy. And now, sure, your Aether Stream Leopard can still stay kind of big, but that's not nearly as good of a payoff. So you do need to make sure you have those too. What about artifacts?
So in Kaladesh, you had black and blue were like the heavy artifact colors. And here it's expanded a little bit because Revolt and Improvise both kind of want similar things. Like a lot of the artifacts are designed towards that, where like the implements, for example, fuel Improvise and you can sack them to enable Revolt. You have the Renegade map. And then you have good Improvise cards among a bunch of different colors, like Bastion Inventor in blue and Sweatworks Brawler in red. So it's kind of expanded the pool. So you're just going to see more decks that are built around artifacts, despite both sets being artifacts. It is more of a theme now than it was before.
Yeah. The artifacts are everywhere and super important. And one of the really interesting things that I've seen pop up already with regards to that are sifting through which ones of them you actually want to destroy and which ones you don't, because or get rid of in another way, because we've got two cards in the set that kind of look like, hey, I might want to play this. There's is it called Natural Obsolescence?
Yeah, one in a green, put an artifact or enchantment on the bottom of the opponent's library.
It's just artifact. And so, yeah. And so like, you'd think to yourself, well, if I find a target for this, I'll probably be pretty happy. But there's a significant number of targets that you would be not thrilled to hit with it. And then we talked about the spell that we opened, the what's it called? Ruinous, whatever, Destructive Tampering.
Yeah.
And that's another one that gives you the ability to snipe a random artifact. But that one's cool because it gives you more than that. But there's two cards right there that make you think, oh, well, if I can find an artifact to hit, I'll be pretty happy. But you do need to make sure that you're actually hitting cards that actually matter. Vehicles are still very worthy of getting snapped off if you have the opportunity. And I do find that interesting that the landscape has more artifacts in it, but they're not all created equally. So you're going to need to really decide that. I have done a significant number of sealed deck and drafts. Like I said, not enough to feel super comfortable in the format. That takes longer. But at least to start getting my legs under me. And I'll tell you one thing that I've seen specifically in sealed, but I've also seemed to have carried it over a bit to draft, which is that green seems very strong. Ridge Scale Tusker is an incredibly powerful.
It's the mythic uncommon. It's the 3 green 5/5 that puts a ++1 counter on each of your other creatures.
Yeah.
It's just an uncommon Virtuous Gearhulk. Like
it is. It plays like that. It's so dumb.
Yeah. If you have 3 other creatures out, which isn't nothing, but if you have that out, it is that the amount of stats is Virtuous Gearhulk, which is a bomb mythic rare.
Exactly. And there's also other good there's also other good green uncommons floating around, like Malfist Revolutionary. That's the 1 red 3/3, 1 green 3/3 trample. And when it enters a battlefield or dies, you get to add an extra counter to something. Like, these are the type of cards that you will open up and they will scream at you, hey, this card's really pushed and powerful. You should probably take it. And guess what? Just those 2 examples that we came up with, which by the way are both uncommon. Neither of those are rare, so you will be seeing them around, are both double green. And, that makes you think, okay, well, I'll stick with green. And green has just enough. It doesn't have quite the insane curve that it did in Kaladesh, but it has enough to keep you hanging around, especially with the addition of Prey Upon. Being added to this set really helps out as well. A cheap, good removal spell is a nice thing to have, especially when you're playing 5/5s that put counters on everything. And I've seen that in sealed quite a bit, that when I'm laying out my sealed pool, there's just some cards like that just kind of stand out. And the Ridge Scale Tusker really is the big one, but there's others too. So green, I think, it kind of has my eye early. It was probably the best card in Kaladesh or color in Kaladesh. And it might be again in Aether Revolt, though I'll need a little more time to figure that out. The draft decks, definitely, I've seen people play a lot more of the implement type decks, the ones that are more focused on things like Improvise, where they can take the Improvise payoff cards early and then pick up the implements later and the cheap artifacts later. That is a very natural 1-2 punch with the Improvise deck, because you need the payoffs. And then the benefit of it is that you can feel comfortable using your early picks on those and some removal spells and get the cheap artifacts that you're going to use to enable the strategy later. No problem. You're not really at a big risk to do that. In sealed deck, that becomes a lot more difficult. You really do need to you just have to open up all of that stuff to make it work. And you can. I've seen people do it, but I've noticed that Improvise feels a lot more like incidental thing in sealed rather than full on improvised decks that I've seen people build in Booster Draft.
Yeah, I have not done any sealeds yet, so I don't have I don't know what the difference is there exactly, but the draft format has felt much more synergistic.
Yeah, for sure. All right, why don't we go through some of the color pairs here and just give our initial impressions on what the color pair's doing and how it's been doing, maybe some of the key cards if we have any that come to mind. We'll start with white-black. What have you been seeing from white-black? I haven't actually got a chance to play it yet.
White-black, it doesn't feel substantively different. Without Fabricate, you have fewer of the like inspired charge white-black decks, but honestly, I like the grindy white-black decks more anyway before. And that's still there. You have Revolt. You have Defiant Salvager is actually, I think, going to be a pretty important card for a lot of these decks. It's the 2/2 for 3 that you can sack a creature artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on it at sorcery speed.
Yeah, for 2 and a black. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it eats your nonsense to trigger Revolt. It's good with cards like Servo, Schematic, and Implements to just get value out of the things you sacrifice. And it lets you use things that bring cards back from the graveyard. So, you get this like recursive theme going too. But white-black still seems like kind of like a mid-range grindy deck.
Yeah, that's definitely the vibe I get as well. The red-white deck is a deck I've actually drafted twice already. And guess what? It's still beat down. It's vehicles, aggro. You don't have to have vehicles, but they do work particularly well in this type of archetype. Renegade Wheelsmith, the gold uncommon, it's 1 white-red for a 3/2. And whenever it becomes tapped, target creature can't block this turn, has been fantastic. We loved it in the set review, and boy, does that card perform. It's really good.
Yeah, I think that's actually going to be just one of the best cards for red-white, just because it makes it impossible for your opponent to block if you ever have it going.
Yeah, and it combines. The thing is that you have to remember it works so well with what red-white's trying to do anyway, because it makes it so something can't block. So as long as it gets to attack or crew a vehicle, it's effectively a removal spell that just sits there and does damage. But also... Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say one of the synergies was with Mobile Garrison, the 3-mana 3/4.
Oh, yeah.
Crew 2, whenever Mobile Garrison attacks, untap another artifact or creature. You get to like crew it with the Wheelsmith, attack, untap the Wheelsmith, crew it immediately before blocks to make another creature on the
That's disgusting. I haven't seen that yet. Wow. Yeah, that's gross. But yeah, what I was going to say is that it's cool because not only do you get to make something not block, which is what you want to do anyway, you still get to cast your removal spells. You still get to use your combat tricks to good effect. And this thing just works well with all of those. So I really like that card. Of course, Untethered Express, the card that we picked out of our second pack, is fantastic here. It's good in any deck, but it's pretty good. And the one little point of relief that we did touch on in the Cracker pack that I wanted to mention is that, Untethered Express is uncommon. We do not have to face it with the same frequency that we did Renegade Freighter, because that card just felt like it was everywhere. And the Express is something that you're going to see significantly often. I mean, it isn't uncommon, but it's not so common that you're just going to see it every single draft. So I think we can breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief there. But I'll tell you what, once somebody plays one of those things against you, do not breathe a sigh of relief, because you are going to die pretty soon.
Yeah.
What about blue-black?
So blue-black is it's kind of funny. It feels a little like the Kaladesh blue-black, but you just have more Gearseeker Serpents. Gearseeker Serpent. It has affinity for artifacts instead of improvise, but it's kind of the same thing. You have Bastion Inventor as one of the bigger hits, but you're still going to try to accumulate a bunch of artifacts. You're still going to try to play undercosted creatures as a result. Still has a little bit of a sacrifice theme, because a lot of the cards that fuel improvise also you get to sacrifice for value. Still feels kind of controlling, but that's just the first read I get. I'm sure I'll investigate this archetype very thoroughly.
Yeah. I agree, though. I think that's a good assessment. Artifacts, very important to that strategy. Blue-red, here's a big question mark, because blue-red fell flat in Kaladesh. It just wasn't
it was
a good
10
thing.
out of 10. It was like, or as in, it was the last out of the 10 color picks.
Yes.
I think by like a reasonable margin.
Yeah, it was really bad. But now, is it going to be good? So this is the big question: is we've now got kind of a signature keyword for this color pair, which is improvise. This can absolutely be an improvised deck. You mentioned the Bastion Inventor. That's the 4/4 hexproof for 6 with improvise. But, in red, it gets Sweatworks Brawler, which I've been really impressed by Sweatwork Brawler. Like, I think
People
that
have
card's
put that
good.
card into constructed decks. So
Oh, really? Wow.
yeah,
Oh, that's
I've
insane.
seen a blue-red improvised deck that has that card in it. But
Okay.
yeah, Solar Explorer is a real card. I mean, this is a new dawn, right? This is 2 packs of Aether Revolt, which is enough to push blue-red into good circulation if the cards are there. This is a very different format, even though Kaladesh cards are still in the format.
Yeah. Of course, in the uncommon gold slot, you've got the Maverick Thopterus, the 3 blue-red 2/2 that makes 2 Thopters, and it's got improvised. That card's a great payoff, and it's actually really cool because it's also an enabler. By creating 2 artifacts just from 1 card, you can power out your next threat as well and really kind of chain things together, which is great. I'll say, though, that one of the question mark cards I had coming into the format as it related to Improvise was Foundry Assembler. That's the 5 mana 3/3 with Improvise, colorless. And that card has definitely disappointed. It just doesn't seem to line up with the curve where you're ever super happy about it. I mean, the best case is that you get it on turn 3. And outside of, Ornithopter or something stupid. And it's just not that impressive. So I have not really liked Foundry Assembler, but I have liked the Bastion Inventor and the Sweatworks Brawler a lot.
Yeah, I think those are all much better. I think Foundry Assembler is kind of a trap. I don't think that's the actual improvised card any deck really wants.
Yeah. When I looked at it, I thought, it kind of reminded me a little bit of Affinity, and I thought to myself, if this card's good, then we know Improvise is just insane, and it's not. So Improvise is probably pretty good still, but just not quite that next level. Green-Black is next, and Louis, I got to say, Green-Black is actually the color pair that I've drafted the most and played the most so far. I'm enticed by those huge green creatures that do the +1/+1 counter stuff. You get Whining Constrictor, which adds counters and gets out of hand very quickly. In fact, Luis, I was doing a draft yesterday, and my opponent, they played a Whining Constrictor on turn 2, which is already kind of like, oh, that's not good. Then they played Fretwork Colony. I was like, and that thing got out of hand incredibly quickly. 2 counters per turn on the Fretwork Colony. And it slammed. So there's all types of cool combos with the Whining Constrictor in this color pair. There's also Life Crafter's Gift, which is the 3 and a green instant, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, and then add an additional +1/+1 creature to every creature you have that has one on it. And that can be a good payoff, if you're playing the Scrounging Bandars, which, by the way, has impressed me as well. That kind of stuff, the Life Crafter's Gift can get you there. And then the other side of the coin, I got these sweet green cards, but the removal is just good. You get Daring Demolition, the 2 black sorcery, destroy a vehicle or a creature. You get
Which might be the best common overall.
It might be. Yeah, the card's just been super solid for me. The ability to reach out and kill a vehicle is so good. It's like, because how many times you had removal in your hand and you're just like, but I can't kill the vehicle, and that's what's going to kill me. That's just off the table with this thing. Cruel Finality's also been solid for me. That's a 2 and a black instant. Charged creature goes -2/-2 until end turn. Scry 1. Fatal Push. That's the black. Destroy a 2-drop, or if you've got Revolt, destroy a 4-drop at instant speed. And then you also get Prey Upon, which I mentioned before, in the green side of things. So that's just a nice combo. Very solid creatures with a good removal suite. It's just tough to beat and limited. It's nothing super flashy, but it tends to get the job done.
Yeah, and when you have a deck that is all quality cards plus synergy, those decks tend to be pretty good. Because all the cards you named are pretty good on their own. Like Life Crafter's Gift's not great on its own, but it is certainly playable. And then all of a sudden, when you combine it with the right cards, it becomes great. Whereas some of the other decks we were talking about, these cards are not good on their own. You have Bastion Inventor, which is very overcosted unless you have a lot of artifacts in your deck. Whereas Green-Black just doesn't suffer from that. And it didn't really in Kaladesh either.
Yeah. Green-White. Revolt seems to be the thing that they were going for with Green-White. But gosh, you and I just went over a few of the cards going through the Crack-a-Packs, the Harpooner, the Silkweaver Elite, the Countless Gears Renegade. We wavered from no thanks to sure on a lot of the common versions of these Revolt cards. And I'm starting to think that maybe these Revolt cards are a little underpowered, and that might affect the overall power level of a green-white deck.
It's possible. I think that green-white still seems like it's a reasonable choice, but I don't like it as much as green-black, for example.
Yeah. And it's similar. I mean, you get caught in the headlights. You get what is it called? Thopter assembly?
Thopter arrest.
Arrest. Thank you. You do get those removal spells to go along, which are pretty good too. And, the one card from this deck that has actually, I've been like, not bad, is Lifecraft Cavalry, the 4/4 Trampler for 4 and a green, and it gets 2+1/+1 counters with Revolt. For some reason, a 5-drop, I found so much more flexibility with the ability to get Revolt going, whether it's just making an attack where I know something's going to trade or die, or having a little bit later in the game to, some time to get that Renegade map down and use it, or to use my Unbridled Growth or something like that. And I have had the Cavalry with 2+1/+1 counters on it a decent amount of the time.
No joke when that happens.
Yeah, and it's good when that happens. I mean, it is scary for your opponent. They just look at it like, man, really? And, the trample's really nice on a card with that much power as well. It's just very difficult to deal with. So I don't know. I'm not in love with it. It's still kind of a 5-drop that, fits the bill of being a 5-drop that's kind of good. But I got to say, I do think the Cavalry gets a little bit of a bump up from where I had it from before.
Yeah, it's the Riparian Tiger of the set.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Green-blue is our next 2-color combo, and I've played it. I kind of like it, but I cheat. I always splash. Yeah, I know you're shocked. I always splash. I splash for red or black to get my removal up to where I want to be, because Prey Upon's fine, and the bounce spell's fine too. But I always feel like I need a little bit more to make it work, so I end up splashing for some red or black removal spells. But Ridgescale Tusker's still here. That's fantastic. I find that a lot of the blue cards just don't seem like they're heavily played at the moment, so maybe they're just a little underdrafted because they're not so great. But I can kind of be picky about it and get the good ones. And you'll even, people generally speaking, they're not trying to splash around, for the Rogue Refiner, for example. You often get those if they're opened up at the table. And that card, of course, goes great in this deck too.
Yeah, one of the things, speaking of blue commons or blue cards, is Frank Carson put up his pick order list for Aether Revolt, where he ranks every single card. And the first blue common that gets on the list is like really far down. Like he thinks blue is by far the worst color. So It's interesting seeing, and it's Aether Swooper actually is what he has as the best blue common, the 1/2 flyer that gets 2 energy and makes a servo. So blue-green could easily be the kind of deck where you start in green, but you get picked like a Rogue Refiner or something like that kind of pushes you into blue, or you get some late cards that fit into your deck because people are generally not going into blue early. Yeah,
that is how it has played out for me. I mean, they're green decks. That's what's happening is I'm first picking a Ridgescale Tusker, and then the color that seemed to be there the most was blue. That's kind of how things have gone. One more that we wanted to mention here, which is blue-white. Now, I have to admit, I haven't actually played a straight blue-white deck yet, but I do have my eye on some cards here, Louis. So I'm going to tell you, these are the flyers that we've got now. We've got Dawnfeather Eagle, which I've been very impressed by. That's a 3/3 flying for 4 and a white. When enters the battle, yeah, everything gets +1/+1 in vigilance. That's really good. Gear per Osprey. Whatever. That's the 2/2 flying for 2 and a white. I haven't really loved that. Hinterland Drake. Yeah, it's fine. Whatever. Aether Swooper, the one we just talked about, that card's been fine. I think it's pretty good. And then the uncommons are really nice. Airdrop Aeronauts. That's the 4/3 flyer for 3 white with Revolt, gain 5 life. The Skyship Plunderer that we opened up in the Crack-a-Pack. The Windkin Raiders. Spire Patrol. That's the gold card. I wonder if we've just got a straight blue-white flyers build available back in Limited, because it didn't really come together that well in Kaladesh.
Very bad in Kaladesh.
Yeah.
At least the aggro-ish version. My guess is no, but we'll see.
Okay. Yeah, there's some of the tools are here as far as just the density of flying creatures. But of course, you need to be able to block on the ground and kind of keep your opponent off balance. It feels like the tools are here. I just don't know if it can compete with kind of the big hitting synergy decks, especially Improvise or something like that. If you're just playing Gear per Ospreys and your opponent's playing Sweatworks Brawler, I don't like your chances.
It just feels like the rate on the flyers, like the power level on the flyers is just not pushed on any of them, which leads to overall you just not being in a spot where you can really assemble a deck by just adding all the flyers together. You need something to hang your hat on, and that's really none of the common flyers.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll keep an eye on that one. Anything else stood out to you? We're going to have a little bit shorter of a show this week just because, like I said, I'm in California here at Woody's, and plus I've got a battle tomorrow, so I want to make sure that we don't go too long. But was there any other stuff that popped out to you about the set? Yeah, you said earlier that you thought this is going to slow things down a bit. How much do you see that actually happening?
I'm not sure what the net is, like exactly how much slower it gets. It is worth noting there's a lot of mana sinks in the set, which weren't present in Kaladesh. Kaladesh had energy sinks, but you have like the automaton cycle, right, which is all the activated abilities on these colorless creatures that give you something to do in the late game. They give you something to sink your mana into, as it were, and that's the sort of thing that points to me as a slower format.
You know, I want to talk about those really quickly, just because these, I think that people were definitely wondering about the automaton. So let's just go through them real quick. So we talked about the white one earlier, the 2 mana 0/3, 5 mana to bounce a creature besides it that you control. I have not been impressed by it. I have seen it get to the extreme late game, and then it was okay. You can get some value from it. All your opponent's removal spells end up being dead at some point in a late game stall. It's not that it doesn't have a place at all. It's just too bad in the early game where 5 mana is way too much to activate, and the 0/3 blocker's not quite good enough. So I think that one's bad, but I have seen at least some good side of it. Augmenting Automaton's the black one. That's 1 mana 1/1. And it has an activated ability, 1 and a black, to give it +1/+1 until end of turn. I really didn't like it in the set review, and I still don't really like it. I think it's just too weak. Have you had a chance to play with or against it yet?
I have not, but I do think that it's a little better than it looks. It probably is like Sludge Crawler, where the card looked like crap, but it's actually like good.
I think this looks like crap and is crap.
All right, well, we'll check back in a couple weeks.
Yeah, we'll take a look at it. The one thing that I did like in the set review was if I'm improvising often with it, then I'm much better. Verdant Automaton. Now, I have played this one a fair bit. So 2 mana, 1/2, and you can pay 3 and a green to put a counter on it, +1/+1 counter on it. It's fine. I put counters on it.
I don't think it's particularly good. I would like my mana sinks to be a little more on the like watchful automaton side.
All right, well, let's talk about that one. So the blue one, we call this Scry Guy because
3 mana 2/2.
Yeah, go ahead.
And you can pay 2 and a blue to scry one.
Yeah, I've played a bunch of these. I think it's very mediocre.
Yeah, I don't think it's a great card, but I think having one in your deck means you'll just win a lot of late games where the board stalls out.
Yeah, I got to tell you, the fine folks in R&D priced these activated abilities just out of okay, I'm cool with that range, and at every stage, like if it was one lower on any of these, all these cards would be really good. And so, but you put it one further, and it's like yeah, and they definitely dip. The last one is actually, I think, the best of the bunch. It's Welder Automaton. That's the red one. So 2 mana for a 2/1, and you can pay 3 and a red to have it deal a damage to each opponent. I've actually thought this one was pretty good. When my opponent, when I finally stabilize after their initial rush and they play a Welder Automaton, I'm like, well, crap, I actually have to kill that stupid thing.
Yeah, it's funny when it doesn't seem like much, right? Just 1 damage, but when you're at like 7, all of a sudden you look at it and you're like, I'm dead in like 3 turns.
Yeah. And you don't, like, normally it kind of violates a balance of limited, right? Where like when they draw their 2 mana 2/1 late in the game, that's supposed to suck. That's where you're supposed to take over, right? Like if you're the control player and now you're playing your big 5 drops and they don't have any good attacks, when they draw their 2 drop, that's how you win the game. Because in the late game, you're drawing things that are bigger than their cheap aggro curve. But Welder Automaton is like, no, I'm fine actually. And, can really lead to some late game victories. The good news is that it's about as fragile as possible at 1 toughness and being an artifact. So, if you do have effectively any type of removal, you can kill it, but still you have to, often enough that it's got my respect. And, 2 powered 2/1, sure, put it in your aggro deck, turn it sideways. So anyway, I wanted to go over those because I think that those are some question marks that we had coming in, and I've already got a pretty good feel for them. I like the Verdant Automaton a little bit more than you do, but I'm not ready to call it a good card. I think Welder Automaton's the only one that I'd call a good card. And I do think it's a good card.
All right, yeah, a 2-drop that's good in the late game is few and far between. Those are the cards you always prize, so that makes sense.
Okay, well, we'll keep an eye on this as we move forward. Of course, I'm going to be playing in the GP. You're going to be playing on Magic Online. Then we're going to be at the Pro Tour. You're going to be testing. You're going to have a lot more info. I'm going to have a lot more info, and we're going to, further crack this code here that is Aether Revolt. But so far, I'm digging it. It's been fun. I've done some stupid stuff. I like that. And I've also just drafted some really straightforward decks, and I like that too. I like formats that allow us to play both. So hopefully this one does so. And I wouldn't hate it if it slowed down just a little from Kaladesh, just a little. That's going to do it, though, for the show this week. Again, a little bit shorter of a show, but since I'm on the road and it's getting a little late here, I want to make sure that we get Luis enough sleep and that I get enough as well. So we're going to call it here. If you want to find us on social media, it's easy. I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. I want to thank our sponsor, channelfireball.com, for supporting the show. Thank you, CFB. You guys are great. And if you want to find everything you need Magic related on the internet, channelfireball.com is the place to go. They're going to have it in stock. They're going to get it shipped out to you quickly. They stand by their product, and they're really good people over at CFB. And I like supporting good people in all walks of life, and this is one of those. Hence the partnership with them. That is going to do it for the show this week. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
So I talk about hypergeometric calculators a lot. And I wanted to go into depth about what a hypergeometric calculator is, how it's useful, and give you some examples of the.
I think some people. I think some people think that when we say time traveling supercomputer and hypergeometric calculator, we're just making stuff up. And in only one case are we making things up. The hypergeometric calculator is real.
It is. I'm going to put a link to the one I use. You can find a bunch of them online. Basically, what it's trying to do is it gives you the hypergeometric distribution of probability of something you're asking it. It sounds a lot more complicated than it is. It's really not that complicated. So you start with population size. So that would be the number of cards in deck, because we're basically going to use it to figure out your chances of certain things happening in a game of Magic.
Now, that's the number of cards remaining in your deck at the time that you're asking the question, right? Okay.
It is. So to use, let's start with one of the ways you'd use it. You're considering playing Glint Nest Crane in your deck. Look at your top 4 cards, put an artifact in your hand.
Okay.
You have 7 artifacts in your deck.
Okay.
So your population size would be 39, because you're not counting the Glint Nest Crane.
Okay.
You're looking at just the other 39 cards in your deck. Then next is number of successes in population. So that's 7 in this example. There's 7 artifacts in your deck.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Then you're looking at sample size, which is 4. Glint Nest Crane looks at 4 cards.
Okay.
And then you want to look at the number of successes in the sample. Usually you want to look at 1 or greater, because you just care whether you hit or not. And in this particular case, you have a 56% chance to hit 1 or more artifacts, looking at 4 cards with 7 artifacts in your deck.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. And so this is a way that if you get into an argument with your friend, or if you're really stuck on a deck or building a specific type of card like a Glint Nest Crane, and if you had to ballpark it, you might be off. You might be way off. That you can just go on this website, which, like you said, I'll put in the thing, punch this in, and it'll just spit out 56%. And now you have a much more informed decision on whether you want to put that card in your deck or not. That's cool. Right.
And it lets you evaluate whether the card is good. Because, with 7 artifacts, Glint Nest Crane drawing you a card 56% of the time, that's a great card. 2 mana, 1 flyer with a 56% chance of drawing a card and drawing an artifact, which means a spell is quite good. So I'm going to run you through some other examples. One thing you can do is you have 3 outs in your deck. Let's say you have 3 shocks and your opponent's at 2 and know their card will win you the game. Oversimplification, but it is, sometimes this is how it works. You have 2 draw steps and you have 25 cards in your deck. So your population size is 25. Your number of successes is 3. Your sample size is 2. And you have a 23% chance to draw one of those cards.
And the number of successes in sample would still be 1 there.
It would still be 1, because you just need to hit 1 shock. And sometimes you can hit more, for example, one of the ways we used this was Collected Company, right? When you look at your top 6 and put 2 creatures that cost 3 or less into play. Mm-hmm. Then your population size is 39. Your number of successes is 26 out of not 39. That's 59, because you're looking at constructed for this case. Mm-hmm. Number of successes would be 26. and then sample size would be 6. But you want to look at the 2 or greater case because you don't missing with 1 is not what you want. Another couple examples that you frequently use, like you have a 2-land 7-card hand, and you want to know what your chances of hitting 2 lands in 4 draw steps are. And in that case, you'd have a 63% chance
to hit 2 lands. So that's where you've put the number of successes to 2 then?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Another one is like you have a 1-land 6-card hand, and here I count the scry as a draw because it's just easy. It's easy enough to just say that you're just going to scry any non-land to the bottom. And using that metric, you have a 74% chance of hitting a land by turn 2 if you keep a 1-land 6-card hand on the draw.
Ooh, interesting.
So,
thus letting you hit your second land drop on time.
74% of the time you do.
Yeah. Interesting.
Another one is if you have the metric for this is you have 1 Marshal, 1 Manowar in the set, and 2 packs of the set. You have a 72% of drafting that.
Oh, you ran the numbers for me.
I did. I used myself as well. If you have 1 Luis, 14 outs, 5 draw steps with 22 cards in the deck. So 14 outs and 5 draw steps, 22 cards in the deck. You have a 10% chance of hitting that. That's the numbers are in.
You may have punched that one in wrong.
I don't think so. So jokes aside, Hypergeometric Calculator is actually very useful, and we use it fairly often. It's also good to know about because it's the sort of thing that's it's very easy to use, and it makes you sound very intelligent.